Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is Saturday, the 17th of September, 2022, and we will be discussing extensively on financial instruments. And all of our discussion will span through the respective standards that will aid our understanding and application of the requirement of the standards. Now, we will be more or less perusing the details of IAS 32, IFRS 7, IFRS 9, and IFRS 13, respectively. Okay, we will start the part one session today, where we'll be introducing ourselves to the requirement of the standards. Okay, and we will lay the foundation today, starting from IAS 32, in order to provide us better clarifications to understand what financial instruments are, what are the forms of financial instruments, and what are we to do with those financial instruments. But one thing we all know is that financial instruments are usually instruments used in financing and funding a business, okay? And also some of them, to some extreme point, are complex instruments, okay? Because anything that requires finances are not easy to come by. And all of what we are going to discuss will vary from the perspective of the various standards. Now, the content of what we'll be discussing will entail introduction to financial instrument, trying to understand what financial instrument is all about. And we'll look at various ways of presenting those financial instruments. And this classification of financial instruments. We'll look at how to measure those financial instruments. We'll look at various principles with respect to recognition and recognition principles of IFRS 9. And we'll look further on understanding derivatives. Okay, in the introductory aspect, we'll make mention of derivatives and try to explain the principles behind it. But later on, we'll look at critical aspects of derivative with respect to valuation and its accounting. We'll also look at embedded derivatives and its accounting. And we'll look at impairment of assets, especially those ones that are measured at amortized cost. And we will also look further to understanding the impacts of voluntary accounting with respect to age accounting in line with the requirement of IFRS 9, when such has been opted for by an entity. And finally, we'll also look at disclosure requirements with respect to IFRS 7. Okay, in all of this, we'll also make extensive discussion on IFRS 13 with respect to fair value measurements. All of these are what we are going to take into consideration in the course of our discussion on financial instruments. Okay, now when we talk about financial instruments, what do we talk about? Okay, I think at this point, I'm going to switch to my notes, so that I lay a foundation before I put some presentation before you guys. Okay, financial instruments. Now, all of our discussions will span to these four standards. Okay, we'll talk about IAS 32, and that will deal extensively on presentation. Okay, we'll talk about IFRS 9. That's where the bulk of work is. We'll be looking at financial instruments from all perspectives, starting from classification, recognition, to recognition. We'll look at measurements, extension of measurement, we look at impairment assessment. We'll look at embedded derivatives. And we end it up with hedge accounting. Okay, we'll move further to look at IFRS 7, which borders on disclosures, both quantitative and qualitative disclosures. And we end it up with what we will discuss, even though this discussion will not only be limited to financial instruments, but we'll be discussing fair value measurements, which affects all assets and liabilities to some extent, but it plays a pivotal role when it comes to financial instruments. Therefore, we'll be making this discussion in view of all of this. Therefore, which means invariably, we will be faced or confronted with four standards: IAS 32, IFRS 9, IFRS 7, and IFRS 13 in all our discussion. But now we'll start our discussion with IAS 32. Okay. Now, IAS 32 makes us to understand what financial instrument is. What is a financial instrument? Now, the issue here border on the fact that for us to have a financial instrument, there should be a contract, which means a financial instrument emanates from a contract. And this contract gives rise to a party, let me say party A, give rise to a financial asset, and to party B, it could give rise to a financial liability, or rather, if not financial liability, it gives rise to what we can consider as equity instruments. Now, in the bid to understanding financial instruments, we are also creating some other layers, which we can start to look at as something complex, which means financial instruments invariably entails a financial asset on one side, and on the other side, a financial liability or an equity instrument. Now, to further break this down, we need to provide more clarity to this. And the clarity is to understand what is a financial asset, what is a financial liability, and what is an equity instrument. But before we talk about that, we ask ourselves, why this contract in the first place? This contract is usually between two parties. Okay? Party A is usually considered the surplus unit. or the funding units. Or let me say the funding party. And party B is usually the deficit unit. What does that mean? It means company A might have excess fund, which is looking for investment opportunities. And this investment opportunity is a portfolio investment. When I say portfolio investment, which means investment where you want to more or less have a stake in a company for returns that spans from dividend returns, interest returns, and any other forms of return, including capital appreciation. And you can only do that where there is a deficit unit. A deficit unit is another company in this slide who might require funding in order to put into its business. For example, oil and gas company might need billions of dollars or millions of dollars for exploration. And in that light, you will more or less need a funding party who can invest in you via shares in order to have residual ownership, or via debts in order to have a claim over the assets as a lender. And what then do you need? You needed those cash in order to finance your operations. And therefore, two of you can come together to create a financial instrument by way of contract. And that's why financial instruments should naturally be created by way of contract. And that contract will ensure that the surplus units as a financial asset, while the deficit units as a financial liability, or where it does not necessarily require a financial liability, it then means it has an equity instrument. Okay, and that is a position in this case. Now, to further understand it, we then ask ourselves a simple question. The question then is, what do we consider as a financial asset? Now, when we talk about financial assets, we are talking about the following attributes. The first thing that comes to your mind is financial assets entails an investment. In this case, let me call it a portfolio investment. And this investment might be in cash. This investment might be in equity investment. In another entity. This investment might be in debt securities as an investment. An example, the securities of another entity. And let me give examples of this. It could be in bonds. It could be in treasuries. It could be in commercial papers. It could be in promissory notes. It could be in bills of exchange. It could be by way of loans availed to others. It could also be in way of bankers' acceptances, BAs, etc. Also, it could entail trade receivables. These are practical demonstration and understanding and examples of financial assets. And I'll close it out with derivatives. But I'll qualify it, derivative assets. Which means whenever you have any or combination of these, we will more or less see it as financial assets. Okay. Now, as opposed to that, what are financial liabilities? Now, financial liabilities as opposed to portfolio investment, rather, financial liabilities entails a form of borrowings. What does that mean? It means as a deficit unit, as earlier characterized, therefore, you, rather than having debt securities as an investment, you have debt securities as two of funding or tools of borrowing. Okay, and practical example is rather than you buying bond, you are the one issuing bond. You are the one issuing debentures. You are the one borrowing loans. You are the one issuing commercial papers, CPs, issuing promissory notes, issuing bills of exchange, issuing treasuries. But again, that is only limited to government, but let me say treasuries. In this case, we are a government, etc. And it also entails trade payables. When, as a result of trade, you have an obligation to settle arising from trade. And I can also end it similarly to an asset with derivatives. But in this case, I'll qualify it as derivatives liabilities. Okay. Which means we've seen investment side, we've seen borrowing side. But this other side, party B might tend not to consider this side as borrowing, but rather consider it as something else. And that's why we said here that it could be financial liability, which is borrowing, or equity instrument. And what does equity instrument entails? Equity instrument entails equity funding. And what does that mean? What it simply means is that rather than having an obligation to repay at a later date, you rather make the surplus unit who is investing in you an equity holder who is taking up the risk of success or failure of the entity. Okay, and in this case, an equity instrument evidence a residual interest in the entity. And this residual interest considers that whatever is left after deducting all of liabilities from the entity's assets. And therefore, in that case, you have an equity instrument. And what are the examples of equity instruments you might come across? You might come across things like ordinary shares. You might come across things like preference shares. Though ordinary shares might have various classes, Class A, Class B, and also things like that. That is just with respect to voting right and some other things. But ordinary shares are ordinary shares, as simple as ABC. You could have things like deposit for shares and the likes. But I'll take time to asterisk this. I will asterisk both preference shares and deposit for shares, all because later on we'll discuss what we might consider hybrid instruments. And what does that connote? It connotes the fact that this instrument sits at the borderline between a financial liability and an equity instrument. All it means is that they are like chameleon, depending on one or two other factors to actually confer whether this is going to be equity or is going to be a financial liability. And when we get to the fact we want to discuss hybrid instrument, compound instruments, we'll be able to delineate what other factors or considerations are we going to consider or evaluate to determine whether truly in each instance, if a preference share is a financial liability or a preference share is an equity instrument. And that is that. Okay. Now, that is just at introductory level. Any question at this point? Now we have just tried to lay a foundation to say all of our discussion on financial instruments will span through financial IAS 32, which borders on presentation, IFRS 9, which borders on all of this, IFRS 13, which borders on fair value measurement, and IFRS 7 that borders on disclosures. Okay, and we are going to bring them one by one in this order. Okay, and the first one we'll more or less consider now is IAS 32. Subsequently, we'll look at IFRS 9. We'll borrow some leave from IFRS 13, and we might have a closeout under IFRS 7. Okay. Okay, now, and in the interim, we've said something that IAS 32 more or less make us have understanding of what financial instrument is all about. And I said it is a contract that on one hand creates a financial asset to a party to that contract. On the second hand, it creates a financial liability to the party to the contract. And where it does not create a financial liability, it does create an equity instrument. And we said, okay, to delineate it, what was the essence of this contract? The essence of the contract is to provide funds by the surplus unit to the deficit units in return for something. And therefore, we went further to delineate what financial assets are. We said it entails much more portfolio of investments. And what are we talking about? We are talking about investment that might be cash, investment that might be in equity in other entity, or you owe debt in other entity. Such debt entails you having to buy the bonds, the treasuries, the commercial papers, the promissory notes, bills, loans available to others, and it could also entail trade receivable, where you sell an item or you render a service, and thereafter, such a service or such a sale created a financial instrument by way of receivable. And we said trade receivable is also a financial asset in this case. And we also talk about derivative assets, which we are going to come back extensively to discuss later. Now, we also went further to say a financial liability, as opposed to a financial asset, entails much more of borrowings. And the borrowings might be by way of debt securities. Okay, what is unique about debt as away from equity is that debt requires a repayment, and usually a scheduled repayment, which means the principal and the interest are prescheduled, are predetermined. Okay, and these tools for funding entails you issuing a bond, issuing debentures, you borrow loans, you issue commercial papers, and the likes. And it could be by way of trade payables, where you buy goods from someone or you enjoy services from someone. That necessarily is not a financial instrument, but that act or action could create a financial instrument. And in that case, it creates a financial liability by way of you acknowledging you have a payable. And likewise, it will come by way of derivative liabilities, okay, which we are going to discuss later. Now, we also went further to say where it does not create financial liability, automatically, it will create an equity instrument. And an equity instrument in this case, more or less encompasses you having equity funding. And this equity funding is that rather than the funding party to have a claim over the asset, no, rather it only has a claim over the net asset, which speaks to the fact that it has a residual interest in that entity only after all of the liabilities are settled from the asset. Whatever is left from the asset is what you have a claim over. And the instrument of having such a claim on net assets may entail things like ordinary shares, preference shares, deposit for shares. But I said these two more or less have a question mark, all because they sit as a hybrid instrument in between a financial liability and equity instruments. And that presupposes what we did here to say in this diagram, party B could either go for this or go for this, as the case may be. Any other question before we'll more or less venture into further discussions?
Yes, I have a question, sir. It's just a need for clarification because I'm familiar with it before now. Now, it's actually related to this financial assets, and we said cash is a financial asset actually, and so I want to know what's it called. Since we said financial assets will give rise to financial liability in another entity, I don't know, like what's it called?
I didn't say financial asset. Hello?
Sorry, financial instrument itself. Financial instrument
itself.
What's it called? Yes, is where the what's it called? Is a contract that results to financial assets in one entity and then financial liability or equity instruments in another entity. And having cash based on what you mentioned, sir, having cash as a financial asset, does it create a financial, like, I just want to understand the reason why financial asset is actually, why cash is actually a financial asset. That's the question. Thank you.
Okay. Cash is a financial asset because there is a contract you have impliedly with the government that make it a legal tender. You can say now, because every cash you hold is backed by the legal instrument of a country to make it acceptable for transaction, or because you have a value that government is now representing in form of the legal tender given to you. You get what I'm saying now? Which means if, for example, if government want to withdraw a cash in circulation, such government have a responsibility to give me something else that commensurate to the value of that cash. And that's why when they change currency, they give me equivalent of that amount in another currency that is backed by the instrumentality of the law. Otherwise, they must return it in any other financial assets, or because I've created value to hold that cash. Which means impliedly, remember, contract can be expressed, can be implied. For every cash you hold, impliedly you have a contract with governments for which government must always give you value at every point in time for that amount of cash. Does that explain that?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other question? Any other question? Okay, in the absence of no question, as you can see on the screen, okay, to also explain what financial instrument is. Some people thought it's instruments, carpentry instrument, electrical instrument, or engineering instrument, but rather it's nothing other than a financial instrument, which means instruments are tools. But in this case, we are looking at financial tools for funding by surplus units for deficit units. And this can, in today's world, can only be carried out through any of what we can say here. But the most common one are the first two, equity and debt. Okay, but the first level is usually equity. Equity means owner funding in principle, which means anytime you put equity, it means, yes, you are funding, but you are funding as the owner, or because the risk of recovering your fund lies with you. And that's why we talk about residual interest. Funding can also be by way of debt. In this case, you are trying to have a claim over the assets so that you are trying to run away from the risk, so that what if the party I funded or the entity I funded fails? Can I be able to submit something? The answer is yes. Or because at the point of failure, you have a claim, if not a first charge, on the assets of that entity. The third one is derivatives. Derivative primarily should not be a tool of investment, but rather primarily it's a tool for risk management, okay, which is majorly for hedge purposes. But over the time, derivatives have been used as a tool for more of speculation, which tilts it much more to investment. And that also now creates a presence today, so that after equity and debt, derivatives also have the higher value in today's investment world. And lastly, guarantees. Now, guarantees are usually not a form of investment, but rather a support system to ensure that another party has access to funding. Okay? And by nature, all of these four are the primary instruments that can be used in one way or the other, individually or collectively, in creating today's financial instruments. Okay, and the instrument comes in terms of currencies also, which means everything will still end up in cash, or because of the legal tender to it. And that's why it could be in dollars, measured in pounds, euro, in yen, naira, and etc. Okay. Now to reiterate once again, we said financial instrument is a contract that gives rise to financial asset of one entity and a financial liability of another entity, or equity instrument of the other entity. And this speaks again to what we've discussed earlier. And we went further to say what then is a financial asset. We said it could be cash, it could be equity instrument of another entity, it could be instrument that gives a contractual right to receive cash or another financial asset from another entity, or to exchange financial instrument with another entity under conditions that are potentially favorable to the entity. Now, all of this summarizes the aspect of debt securities and trade receivables. Also, it could be a contract that will or may be settled in the entity's own equity instruments. And it's a non-derivative for which the entity is or may be obliged to receive a variable number of entity's own equity instruments, or a derivative that will or may be settled other than by the exchange of a fixed amount of cash or another financial asset for a fixed number of equity owned entity's own equity instruments. Now, this part also speaks to aspect of derivative assets. Okay, and this definition is as contained in IAS 32, which I've simplified by way of the expressions I made earlier. Now, financial liability. The financial liability also comes from a tool that creates a contractual obligation. And this obligation will either be to deliver cash or another financial asset to another entity, or to exchange financial instruments with another entity under conditions that are potentially unfavorable. Now, later on, I will explain the word potentially favorable, potentially unfavorable. Okay, and that speaks to the aspect of debt security you issued and your trade payables, as I've explained earlier. The second aspect speaks naturally to derivative liabilities, which says that a contract that will or may be settled entity's own equity instruments and is a non-derivative for which the entity is or may be obliged to deliver a variable number of entities' own equity instruments, or a derivative that will or may be settled other than by exchange of a fixed amount of cash or another financial asset for a fixed number of the entity's own equity instruments. And finally, I make mention of equity instrument. What is it? I said any contract that evidences a residual interest in the asset of the entity after deducting all of its liabilities. Some instrument may meet the definition of a liability, but represent the residual interest in the net asset of the entity, and therefore may be classified as equity. Remember, I spoke with respect to hybrid instruments. Okay, in certain circumstances, such as putable instruments that give the holder the right to put the instrument back to the issuer for cash or another financial asset automatically on the occurrence of either an uncertain future event or death of the instrument holder, commonly in cooperative structures. Okay, later on, you could see a phrase here called putable and all sorts of things. When we get to derivatives, we'll try to understand things like option, swaps, futures, forward, and the rest. And majorly in option, that's why you have put and you have call and some other things like that. We're going to discuss them extensively. Now, equity instrument issued to acquire a fixed number of entities own non-derivative equity instruments in any currency are classified as equity instruments, provided that they are issued pro rata to all existing shareholders of the same class of the entity's own non-derivative equity. We'll look at all of this by the time we get to complex aspect of those instruments. Now let's look at examples of all this. Now, when we talk about financial assets, as I've broken it down earlier, we are talking of equity instruments, we are talking of debt investment, we are talking of trade receivable, we are talking of notes, bills receivable, loans receivable, and derivative assets. When we talk about financial liabilities, we are talking of trade payables, bank loans, loans from other entities, bonds and other debt you issue, derivative liabilities, obligation to deliver own shares worth a fixed amount of cash, and some other derivatives written on your own shares. Okay, and finally, examples of equity instruments, ordinary shares that can be put back to the issuer by the holder, certain amount of preference shares. The word certain there means not all preference shares might be qualified as equity. Some qualify as equity, some qualify as financial liabilities. Likewise, warrant or written call options that allows the holder to subscribe for or purchase a fixed number of ordinary shares in exchange for a fixed amount of cash or another financial asset, even though it may result in receipt or delivery of cash. This aspect, when we get to share-based payment, IFRS 2, we'll better appreciate it when we have what we call equity settled, cash settled, and the hybrid settled share-based payment transactions. Okay, now in the light of this, I want to create an exercise, and that exercise is to put some transactions into place. And upon putting those transactions into place, you guys will give me, you'll be able to answer whether these are financial instruments. I'm not interested whether they are financial assets, category, or financial liability or equity instrument, but what I'm interested in is that are they financial instruments or not? I are going to do that individually in that respect. Now, let me put the question up. From the underlisted, items, which one or more qualify as a financial instrument? Biological assets, trades payable, current tax payable, trade receivable, accrued expenses, repayments, or what some people call prepaid expenses, inventories, intangible assets, investments, properties, deferred tax assets, deferred tax liability, swaps, options, forwards, futures, swaptions, callable bonds, putable bonds, provisions for warranty, deferred revenue, okay, I think 20 is okay. 20 is okay. I'm going to divide you guys into groups. We'll discuss it and you come up with your answers and justifications. And again, for any item you seem not to be familiar with, you can Google it to understand what that item is. Okay, but I expect that we all know what all of those items are because we've discussed them extensively when we discuss presentation of financial statements at the beginning of this program. Okay, now we will go on. I'm going to divide you guys into cohorts and you guys will discuss it, okay? Just into two groups, I guess. And each group will come back with their position, as the case may be. Okay, we are back, and you guys have more or less deliberated and you've mentioned them. Okay, without bias, I'm going to more or less pick them one by one. First, I'll pick those that are financial instruments. I'll mark them green. And those that are not financial instruments, I'll mark them down as red. Okay, now let's pick it one by one. Trade payable is a financial instrument. Trade receivable is a financial instrument. Swap, it is. Option, it is. Forward, it is. Futures, it is. Swaption means writing an option on a swap. Callable bond, it is. Putable bond, it is. Okay. Now, the following are not. biological assets, current tax payable, accrued expenses, prepaid expenses, inventories, intangibles, investment property, deferred tax asset and liabilities, provision for warranty, and deferred revenue. Now, from each group, over 20, group 1, what did you score?
Z over
9.
8 over 9.
No. We are talking of the whole scores over 20 now. How many did you get correctly?
We get everything apart from the swap option, because we're not too sure what that is.
Swap option, okay.
Yes,
that means you didn't Google it. That means you scored 19 over 20.
Yes.
Actually, okay.
Group
Sorry.
2.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, Samuel, you want to speak? Speak.
Yes, sir. Actually, I tried checking for the swaption because I was not too familiar with it. And probably I did not make the research appropriately. But when I checked it online, I saw that swaption was defined as a right that does not result to an obligation, that does not give rise to an obligation. And with the understanding of financial instruments, we have an understanding that whenever there's a financial asset, definitely it will result to an obligation or equity instrument in other entities. So that's the reason why I had to conclude that. So.
Okay. No, I won't get to derivatives. You have better appreciation of it. Okay. Now, team 2, what did you score over 20? Team 2, I can't hear you. Who is speaking on your behalf?
I didn't get the question, sorry.
I said, what did you guys score over 20? Did you get all of it right? How many did you get wrong?
Oh, we got it right. We got it all right.
Are you sure?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Is there any question specific that you guys want to know why this is this and why it is not this? Which one specifically do you want to contest, or do you want further clarification on?
Okay.
All right.
For me, I want to, okay, sorry, Sammy.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to throw more light on that swap shots because I didn't really have an idea what that is.
And when we get to derivative, we'll speak on that.
Okay.
I said it,
yeah.
Which other one? Which other one? Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
It's not the issue of derivatives now, but we're just trying to take the one-on-one debate on them. We looked at that biological asset. We tried to ask a question, and although it's off the point, but let's just try to see if it's clear. We said there are assets that are used to generate that's being owned by a business. I believe it's not their exactly their ordinary activities. It's one of the extraordinary activities. And when I ask a question, if a person that's running a poultry and they have these animals, are those animals, they trade on those animals, would they be seen as biological assets or would they be as an inventory?
Okay. That is one of those things that I'm going to give you on demand. Okay. I'll give you a link after today to my video I did on IAS 41, which speaks to biological asset and agriculture. Okay. And there's a thin line between inventory and biological assets. But what is for a biological asset? A biological asset is simply living plants and living animals. Okay? Now, what is then the thin line between the two? Let me start with plants. Living plants are biological assets. Once you harvest them, they become inventory. At the point of harvesting, they first of all metamorphose into what we call agricultural produce, and later on becomes inventory. Okay, but when it comes to living animals, okay, they are biological assets up to the point of harvest. Harvest is the point of probably you kill them to have the meat for processing or production or for sale. Or you harvest them alive in such a way that you have more or less taken them out of production process, but you are putting them aside as what you want to sell and to get cash. Okay, and it becomes inventory at that point. But we also have living animals that we call bearer animals. And we also have living plants that we call bearer plants. Now let me start with the plants. A bearer plant is not a biological asset. Neither is an inventory, but is an item categorized as property, plant, and equipment, which means it will fall in as a plant for the purpose of IAS 16. And when you watch those videos, and I'll give you my worksheet and all sorts of things to guide you further. Whereas a bearer plant, a bearer animal is still a biological asset. And what's a bearer animal? A bearer animal is an animal that more or less is still living, is in a condition you can probably sell it, but rather than sell it, what do? You hold on to it for the sole purpose of bearing other animals, that is giving rise to other animals, like for production purposes, which means they are producing other animals, or for example, chicken, for the sole purpose of production of eggs when it comes to layers and others, okay? Bearer plants are usually cash crop or cash plants, so that, like when you have a palm tree, is to produce fruits such as coconut, such as palm kernel, and other ones, cashew tree, and etc. Those ones are what we call bearer plants. Does that answer your question now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Thank
but it's more extensive than what I've said. And that's why I will provide you, those are part of the on-demand video that you will have access to. Okay, I've given you one before now, and I'm going to give you this as a second one. Okay, and it will take you about 3 hours extensive that you will be able to understand end to end what biological assets are, how they metamorphose to agricultural produce, and later end up being an inventory where applicable, and some end up becoming an items of property, plant, and equipment. That's that. Thank you very much. Okay, now the next level of our discussion is to quickly speak on derivative. On derivatives. I can call them financial derivatives. Now, I'll use their attributes to explain them. The first thing is this: a financial derivative is a financial instrument. 2, usually it has little or no value, no initial value or investment. The third attribute is that it has no value of its own, but it derives its value from the changes in the value of underlinings. The underlining could be assets or could be variables. We'll discuss them. Example of those variables. Maybe market prices, interest rates, commodity prices, inflation rates, FX rates, etc. These are the market variables that serve as underlying. Again, it requires only future settlements. And finally, it must be net settled in cash. That is what distinguishes financial derivatives from all other derivatives, which means from the angle of financial instruments, we are talking of financial derivatives, which means not all derivatives are financial instruments, but all financial derivatives are financial instruments because of these 4 qualities here. These 4 qualities. Okay. Now, I will explain them one by one. The first quality speaks to the fact that to enter into a financial derivative, you can enter into it without necessarily putting money down. Or where you are required to put money down is a highly levered instrument whereby for transaction of 1 million naira worth of derivative, you might be putting just 10,000 naira down when necessary. 2, there is no derivative that has value of its own. Rather, they derive their value from movement in the value of the reference point. The reference point is what we always call the underlying variable, which might be assets or any other form of variable. What it means is this. If you write a derivative on FX rates, it is a movement in the FX rates that will create a gain to a party and a loss to another party. But if the FX rate remains the same all through the period, no gain, no loss, therefore no value created. But the reality is that there is always going to be movement which invariably will create value. And one thing about it that I didn't mention earlier is that derivative usually creates what we call a zero-sum game. It also creates a zero-sum game. What does that mean? It means the exact gain to a party is the exact loss to another party. So that at every point you come together, it's zero, which means when you net out the gain with the loss, it becomes what? Zero. Next is that financial derivative does not require physical delivery of the variable. Rather, it's usually net settled in cash. Net settled in cash means that if you have derivative on the fact that FX is moving upward or downwards, now you are not necessarily going to be getting that foreign currency, but rather you'll be getting the differential of what you have written derivative on in your local currency, either by way of gain or by way of loss. If it's by gain, you'll be receiving the differential. If it's by way of loss, you will be paying the differential. And the party that gains has created the derivative asset. The party that loses has created a derivative liability, which means to party A that has derivative asset as a financial asset is a gaining party. To party B that has financial liability as derivative liability is a losing party. And lastly, as I said, it requires only future settlement. What it simply means is that that settlement is what will be made at a later date, even though the transaction has been entered into at an earlier date. And that is the position of derivative. Any question? Any question? Okay.
There's no question for that.
No question for now?
Yes,
Okay.
sir, from my hand. No question.
Okay. Now let's move further. Now, derivative. Can be classified into two. Those considered forward commitments and those considered contingent claims. Remember, there are two parties to every contract, at least. Party A and Party B. In a forward commitment, both parties have an obligation to perform. Whereas in a contingent claim, we equally have Party A and we have party B. But party A has let's say has a right and party B has an obligation. Now, what does this suggest? It suggests that this is symmetrical. Why this suggests asymmetrical? And what does that mean? This is skewed to one side, and to whose side is skewed to the right side. Now I will explain them one by one. What an obligation is here is that at the period to which settlement is to be made, both parties cannot withdraw. They must execute that transaction. The person that gain must get his gain. The person that lose must bear the loss. And settlement must be made to close up the transaction. Whereas in a contingent claim, at the settlement date, which is more or less the maturity period of the transaction, party A has an option to either execute or walk away. And party A will execute if that option will be favorable, that is gaining. But it will walk away if it's losing, which means it's unfavorable. But party B is always at the mercy of party A, either executing or not. And why? Because at the point of entry into the transaction by party A and B, party B has sold his rights to A so that he has collected a price, what we call a premium, for selling his rights. This is similar to insurance company, whereby insurance companies sold their rights for you to pay a premium as an insured, so that you now have a right in a case where if you crash your car, they must indemnify you. And if you don't crash, you walk away. But they are always there waiting towards your decision, whether you are walking away or you are executing the contract, which they are compelled to abide by the terms. In that case, we say it is asymmetrical on the basis that on one hand, somebody has right, on the other hand, somebody has obligation. Whereas in a forward commitment, both parties have an obligation, which makes it symmetrical. Now, what are the nature of contracts? That you can find under forward commitment? You can find what we call forward contracts. Which automatically we call forwards. You can find futures contracts, which we call futures for short. And lastly, you can find swaps contracts. which for short, they are called swaps. And here, we only have one. Options contract, which for short, we can call what? Options. Now we'll now look at the attributes of this one by one. Now let's look at the attributes one by one. I'll start with forwards. Now, the first attribute of a forward contract is that it is a customized contract. What is a customized contract? Contract that is not standardized. And it's not standardized because it is entered into by two parties, any two parties. It can be you and I, it can be company and an individual, it can be an individual and company, and all sorts of things. And what makes it not standardized is not even that, but because there is no organized exchange who is standing in between the two parties as an umpire to ensure that things goes appropriately and there's no default. Two, because of the nature of it to be customized and not standardized, it is usually an OTC contract. What is an OTC? That is over the counter contracts. Three, it requires no initial investment to enter into it. It's just mere signing papers. But that paper might be as much onerous than even putting money down. And four, it only requires an exchange of a single cash flow at the future settlement date. And lastly, it is embedded with credit or default risk. What it means is that one party might fail to meet up with his obligation, thereby creating a default risk from the losing party. Which means if I lose and I'm unable to deem my pledge, in that case, I've created a default risk such that the gainer, which is the other party that owns that derivative asset, is unable to realize his gain as a result of my default. Next is features. Futures contract is more or less like a forward contract. But the difference is that it addresses one or two shortcomings of a forward contract, starting from the fact that a forward contract is not standardized, but in the case of futures, it is a standardized contract. It is standardized because it is rooted through an organized exchange. It trades or gets executed in an organized market, that is exchanges, or what they call clearing houses. Three, unlike where it requires no investment, in this case, it requires investment, but in this case, little amount. It requires little, which can be insignificant. Initial deposits or investment as a precondition to entering into the contract. That is, we call it a margin, initial margin. Also, the common features with forward is that it only requires an exchange of a single cash flow at the future settlement date. And lastly, unlike where these have credit risk, it's immune participants from credit or default risk. What it means is that it has no credit or default risk. That is that. Now, how does this two vary from a swap? Swap contracts. One, swap contract is equally a customized contract, like forwards. Two, it is traded or executed over the counter. Like forward, it requires no initial deposits or investments. But in this case, unlike forward contract that requires a single cash flow, no, a swap requires more than a single cash flow, at least two cash flows, which means it entails exchange of series of cash flows. To make it series means at least two exchanges or more. Next, like a forward contract, it has a credit or default risk. Now, the only difference between swap and forward is this number 4, which speaks to the fact that it entails series of cash flow. And that's why we can conclude that a swap contract is a series of off-the-run forward contracts, which means when you enter forward contract on the same terms at multiple dates of settlements, we consider it a swaps contract. And we're going to see it later as we move on with explanation. Now, let me quickly use one or two examples here. If you will, some of you want to japa. Now, if you will require, imagine some of you claim you want to do masters in UK so that I can run away before 2023. And you need it in January to pay for the school fees. Now, you don't know what the exchange rate will be in January. It could go up, it could come down. But what risk do you that want to japa have? You that is trying to run away impliedly by way of schooling abroad, you are scared that the naira you have been saving that you are expected to realize and use it to buy dollar might not be enough to buy the same amount of dollar due to the fact that naira might have depreciated further to dollar. Let's say naira is 600 now. By the time you get to January, it might have gone to 800. What that means that before you might require 6 million naira to get $10,000. Now you now require 8 million naira to get the same $10,000. Now, that is a risk you are trying to avoid. Although there are opportunities to say, who says naira cannot fall from 600 to 500? But the question is, you will be less concerned about falling. You'll be much more concerned about rising, because if it rises, you might not have opportunities to school abroad again or run away. Therefore, how do you avoid this risk? Or how do you transfer this risk? Or in short, how do you mitigate this risk? Is that you try to hedge your exposure, which is a risk management philosophy. And hedging means that you are looking for a counterparty. The word counter means somebody else that is seeing things from different perspectives from where you are seeing it. And who is that person? Probably it is me. Who am I? I have family abroad. My parents are abroad. I'm living in Nigeria. I'm not relocating. I'm managing myself in Nigeria. And my parents always support me in Nigeria by sending me money for certain activities I need to do in Nigeria. Imagine I'm doing my own MBA in Nigeria, in Lagos Business School, for example. And I have to pay school fees up to as much as 6 million naira. And my parents said, okay, you are starting your MBA in January in Lagos Business School. Okay, by January, I'll send you $10,000. And the $10,000 is premised on the fact that currently the exchange rate is 600 naira. Now, with them means that they've quantified and say, okay, once they send $10,000, you sell it and you get 6 million naira. But me, I'm concerned that the new narrative of the government, they set new economic team headed by Mr. President. It seems they are very serious now. There is more or less a light at the end of the tunnel. And as a result of that, it's likely that Naira will start to appreciate because it will be coming with policies that will support Naira. And in that case, my fear is, what if Naira falls from 600 to 500? The $10,000 my parents are sending to me might not be enough for me to register for my MBA in Lagos Business School. Because by the time I get it in January, and Naira has waxed stronger to the tune of 500 Naira, what I realize is 5 million. And I'll have short of 1 million Naira. Therefore, I'm seeing things from another angle. I'm not necessarily seeing it from the angle that what if it rises? I'm looking at it as what if it falls? Whereas you that is trying to run away, you are looking at it when it rises, which means we are much more biased to our need and the side of the coin we are sitting or standing, as the case may be. Therefore, in the Yoruba parlance, they say, what does that mean? It means somebody that fear Naira depreciation has met somebody that fear Naira what? Appreciation. Therefore, two of you can exchange your exposure to give yourself comfort. And what is it? Two of us will agree and say, I'm going to be needing dollar. You will be needing Naira. Can we agree a fixed rate? And let us even say the rate is 600 today, and we still agree at 600 for January, so that I'm rest assured that I'll get dollar at 600. The other guy is also rest assured that I'll get Naira at 600. Therefore, two of us are at rest. In that case, if we peradventure enter into this contract and we seal it and it becomes enforceable by law, what we have simply actualized is that we have created a forward contract. And that's what we mean by forward contract. Now, because there's a possibility that in January has come, and we discover that Naira has fallen to 480. I might be tempted, you that you are jackpot might be tempted and say, for where? 600, I won't buy it too. When I can go to the market at 480, Nigeria is changing. In that situation, what happens? It means I can give you one excuse or the other, or you can give me one excuse or the other in order not to fulfill your own bargain, because you've seen that you can independently go to the market at 480 and get it and save more money. Then you can start you can start to give me story to say, your money is stolen. No, I didn't have money now. I've not gotten it. I'm not even going abroad again. You know, all of those stories. Likewise, imagine Naira has not gotten to 800 Naira. Even if I can give you story. My parents have not sent the money. The money, they are even struggling. I don't even think I can do it again. Also of things. Therefore, even though you can enforce it in law, but that one will take a longer process, which means there's a default, whether you like it or not. And to avert this default, instead of entering into a forward contract, the instrument you can use otherwise is what we now call a futures contract. And what is the difference is that I can no longer deal directly with you, neither can you deal directly with me. Even in reality, you won't even know who you are dealing with. The only person you will be seeing and I will be seeing is the exchange. Let me give a typical example. When you buy shares, do you know the person you are buying shares from in the capital market? No. It might be your neighbor that is selling his shares that you are buying and you don't know. It can be your enemy. It can be your boss. It can be your wife. It can be your husband. It can be anybody. But you don't know. Who do you know? You know the Nigerian exchange because it's standing in between two of you. With them in a futures contract, it is only done by way of exchange, what they call a clearing house. And that exchange will be the one to buy from you and sell to me. And in that situation, the exchange will now require that anyone coming to enter into such a contract of derivative must always put something down as a collateral. And what you put down is what we call initial margin. For example, if you are entering into a contract that is valued at 1 million naira at both sides, they can say every party must put down 10% of the amount. 10% means that I'll put down 100,000, you will put down 100,000. Even though we don't know ourselves, and it will go into the account. Now, what is that meant for? It's meant for the fact that as exchange rate moves against me, I'm already losing value, and that loss will be charged to my own 100,000. You are gaining. That gain will be credited to your own 100,000, which means if I've lost 20,000, my own account will reduce from 100 to 80. Your own will increase from 100 to 120. The reason why they are doing this is this. Peradventure at the settlement dates, the exchange rate have moved such that I've lost 80,000 and you have gained 80,000. They won't need me to bring money again because I've already deposited amount close to that loss, which means they will now remove 80,000 from my 100,000 and give it to you. You will now walk away with 100,000 you deposited plus 80,000, which is 180. I will now walk away with my balance of 20,000. And that contribution we made serve as collateral. The question next is, what if that collateral is no longer adequate? And why will it no longer be adequate? It won't be adequate if the movement is such that that 100,000 might not be enough to cover for my loss. That means that as that 100 naira gets to, like, let me say 80 naira or 90 naira, the rule will say you have to call for maintenance margin, which means you have to call for margin to restore you back to that 100 naira. Which means if at 85 naira they call for margin, I must put additional 85 naira there because I've already lost 85, which make it remaining 15. By the time I put another 85 there, it restores me back to 100. But the person that has gained, which is now 185, initial 100 plus 85, cannot withdraw from that account. At the end of the day, I put another 85 because I'm the losing party, and it sums back to 100. And we start to do it again up to the maturity date. And the essence of all this is to ensure that there's a protection so that the winning party does not lose, and the losing party does not default. And that is that. The next question you might ask me is this: what if you call for maintenance margin of 85 for me to restore it and I don't have, or I can't do it again? Therefore, what will happen is that the exchange will now stand in for you by terminating your contract, which means you have lost totally, and the exchange will take over it, awaiting another buyer, or they take over the transaction up to the end, so that if they lose, it's the exchange that lose. If they gain, it's the exchange that gain. But the exchange is protecting the gaining party at every point in time, that there is no default. Rather than there to be default, I will take over it and I'll bear the brunt. And that is that. Okay. How does that differ from swaps? Now, swaps in its own sense is also customized, which means exchange does not come into interface. But the difference between swap and forward is this. Imagine I'm schooling abroad, okay? And usually school fees may not be paid at once. Let me say I'm doing masters and I have to have 3 semesters, for example. They might tell me that at the beginning of each semester, I pay the first payment. Beginning of second semester, I pay the second payment. The beginning of third semester, I pay the third payment. If that is the case, and each payment is $5,000, which means I'll pay $15,000, but $5,000 at each quarter or at each 6 months for simplicity. Therefore, what will I do? Because exchange rate might vary from 1 month to the other, from 1 half year to the other, I'll now look for somebody like me, or you look for somebody like me, that every 6 months, the parents send $5,000 or more. And in that case, what do? You enter into a transaction with me that every 6 months for the next 3 cycles, we will exchange our cash flow at 600 naira. Which means we are entering 4 contracts for every 6 months, but we are entering it at once ahead, under the same terms and conditions. And that's what we call a swaps contract, which means it's entering into a series of 4 contracts under the same term and condition that requires exchange of cash flows more than once. And that's the swap contract, which means every 6 months, I bring up the equivalent of $5,000 at 600 naira, and you also give me dollars, and we'll do that for the next 6 months, regardless of what the exchange rate stands to be at each cycle, at every 6 months. That is that. Any question before I move to the one that is totally different from them, which is the option? Any question?
All right. My question is, I just want to, although I'm also familiar with that concept, over the counter. So, and from the explanation you give now, I was able to understand that forward contract has to do with what's it called, contract between two parties, while future requires an intermediary, which is the, what's it called, the exchange. And this over the contract, is it, I just want to, sorry, over the counter rather, I just want to understand the nomenclature over the contract, over the counter rather. I just want to understand what that nomenclature actually implies. Thank you.
Over the counter implies what it implies, which means it implies that you are doing things. Okay, when you stand over the counter, you are the other side of the counter, and on the other side of the counter, we are doing transaction. It's like in an open market where any 2 persons can relate with one another to buy and sell. Does that make sense?
Very well. All right. Thank you.
Yes. Any other question? Any other question? Okay. Now let's look at options. Option contracts. Now, the nature of option contract is that it's also a customized contract. Which means the only standardized contracts are futures contracts. It's also a customized contract. 2, because it's customized, it is traded or executed over the counter. 3, option usually requires little initial investments. By way of option premium or what they call option price. And again, it's usually insignificant to the contract value. Contract notional value. Okay, we might discuss the word notional later if time permits. Now, usually it requires exchange of a single cash flow except for swaption. Except for swaptions contracts. Okay, later I'll come to swaption. And it also has a credit or default risk. Because anything over the counter comes with that risk. And as we started with, it is an asymmetric, or some people call it asymmetric, derivative contract. In which a party has the right whilst the other party has the obligation. And that is that. As I've explained, a closer example of an option contract to any non-technical financial person is insurance contracts, where you approach an insurance company or they approach you and they say, okay, we can give you a right so that if anything happens to your car, to your house, to this, to that, we'll pay you. And I say, hey, wow, how possible? They say, it's just for a fee. If your car is 10 million, if you can pay us 500,000 per year, we will insure your car so that if you have a total loss, we can buy a new car for you at that amount. And once you pay that amount, you already have a right, whereas you have some obligation. And that is a closer look at an options contract. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if that is the case, let us go back to our presentation slide. Can somebody read this out for us? What derivatives are?
Derivatives, a financial instrument or other contracts with all three of the following characteristics. One, its value changes in response to the change in a specified interest rates, financial instrument price, commodity price, foreign exchange rates, index of prices or rates, credit rating or credit index, or other variables, sometimes called the underlying. It requires no initial net investment or an initial net investment that is smaller than would be required for other types of contracts that we expected to have a similar response to changes in market factors, and it is settled, that is net settled in cash at official dates. In finance, a derivative is a contract that derives its value from the performance of an underlying entity. This underlying entity can be an asset, index, or interest rate, and is often called the why most insurance contracts have underlying. Derivatives can be used for a number of purposes, including insuring against price movement, which is hedging, increasing exposure to price movement for speculation, or getting access to otherwise hard to trade assets or markets. Some of the more common derivatives include forward, future, option, swaps, and variation of these, such as synthetic collateralized debt obligation and credit default swap. Most derivatives are traded over the counter off exchange or on an exchange such as Chicago Mercantile Exchange, developed into a separate industry. Derivatives are one of the three main categories of financial instruments, other than two being stock, that is equities or shares, and debt, that is bond and mortgage. Forward contracts. In finance, a forward contract, or simply a forward, is a non-standardized contract between two parties to buy or to sell an asset at a specified future time at a price agreed upon today, making it a type of derivative instrument. Swap contracts. A swap is a derivative in which two counterparties exchange cash flows of one party's financial instruments or for those of the other party's financial instrument. The benefits in question depend on the type of financial instrument involved. Future contract. In finance, a future contract is a standardized contract between two parties to buy or sell a specified asset of standardized quantity and quality for a price agreed upon today. The future price with delivery and payments occurring at a specified future date. The delivery date making it a derivative product. Option contracts. An option is a contract which gives the buyer, which is the owner, the right, but not the obligation, okay, to buy or sell an underlying asset or instrument at a specified strike price on or before a specified date. Forward contracts. This is a contract to a spot contract, which is an agreement to buy or sell an asset on its spot date, which may vary depending on the instrument. For example, most of the FX contracts have spot dates 2 business days from today. The party agreeing to buy the underlying asset in the future assume a long position, and the party agreeing to sell the asset in the future assume a short position. The price agreed upon is called the delivery price, which is equal to the forward price at the time the contract is entered into. The price of the underlying instrument in whatever form is paid before control of the instrument changes. This is one of the many forms of buy or sell orders where the time and date of trade is not the same as the value date where the security themselves are exchanged. The forward price of such a contract is commonly constructed with the spot price, which is the price at which the asset changes hands on the spot date. The difference between the spot and the forward price is forward premium or forward discount, generally considered in the form of a profit or loss by the purchasing party. Forwards, like other derivative securities, can be used to hedge risks, typically currency or exchange rate risks, as a means of speculation or to allow a party to take advantage of the quality of the line instrument, which is time sensitive. The contracts are negotiated at a future exchange, which acts as an intermediary between buyer and seller. The party agreeing to buy the underlying asset in the future, the buyer of the contract is said to be long, and the party agreeing to sell the asset in the future, the seller of the contract is said to be short. While the future contract specifies a trade taking place in the future, the purpose of the future exchange is to act as intermediary and mitigate the risk of default by either party in the intervening period. For this reason, the future exchange requires both parties to put up an initial amount of cash, performance bonds, the margin. Margin sometimes set as a percentage of the value of the future contract, which needs to be proportionally maintained at all times during the life of the contract to underpin this mitigation, because the price of the contract will vary in keeping the supply and demand and will change daily, and this one party or the other will theoretically be making or losing money. To mitigate risks and the possibility of default by either party, the product is marked to market on a daily basis, whereby the difference between the prior agreed upon price and the actual daily future price is settled on a daily basis. This is sometimes known as a variation margin, where the future exchange will draw money out of the losing party margin account and put it into the other party, though ensuring that the correct daily loss or profit is reflected in the respective accounts. If the margin account goes beyond a certain value by the exchange, then the margin call is made and the account owner must replenish the margin account. This process is known as marking to market. Though to the delivering date, the amount exchanged is not the specified price on the contract, but the spot value, that is the original value agreed upon, since any gain or loss has already been previously settled by making to market. Upon marketing, the strike price is often reached and creates loss of income for the caller. A swap is a derivative in which two counterparties exchange can flow. Have you not read this before? Okay, a swap is a derivative in which two counterparties exchange can flow off one party's financial instrument for those of the other party financial instrument. The benefits in question depend on the type of financial instruments involved. For example, in the case of swap involving two bonds, the benefit in question can be the periodic interest, which is coupon payment associated with such bond. Specifically, two counterparties agree to exchange one stream of cash flows against another stream. These streams are called the swap legs. The swap agreement defines the dates when the cash flow are to be paid and the way they are accrued and calculated. Usually at the time when the contract is initiated, at least one of these series of cash flows is determined by an uncertain variable such as floating interest rates, foreign exchange rate, equity price, or commodity price. The cash flow are calculated over a notional principal amount. Contrary to a future, a forward, or an option, the notional amount is usually not exchanged between counterparties. Consequently, swap can be in cash or collateral. Swap can be used to hedge certain risks, such as interest rate risks, or to speculate on changes in the expected direction of underlying price. In finance, an option is a contract which gives the buyer, which is the owner, the right but not the obligation to buy or sell an underlying asset, or interest at an underlying asset or instrument at a specific strike price on or before a specified date. The seller has a corresponding obligation to fulfill the transaction, that is, to sell or buy if the buyer, which is the owner, exercises the option. The buyer pays a premium to the seller for this right. An option that conveys to the owner the right to buy something at a certain price is a called option. An option that conveys the right of the owner to sell something is a certain price, is a put option. Both are commonly traded, but for clarity, the call option is made frequently discussed. Options valuation is a topic of ongoing research in academics and practical finance. In basic sense and value of an option in commodity decomposed into two parts. The first part is the intrinsic value, defined as the difference between the market value of the underlying and the strike price of the given option. The second part is the time value, which depends on a set of other factors, which through a multivariable non-linear interrelationship reflects the discounted expected value of that difference at expiration. Although options valuation has been studied since the 19th century, the contemporary approach is based on the Black School model, which was first published in 1973. Financial liabilities.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, now we've discussed extensively all what we have with respect to options, swaps, futures, and forwards. Any question before we move down to the next discussion? Any question? Okay, now we'll talk about hybrid instrument and compound instruments, okay? And to discuss that, I will first of all, more or less provide a narrative, okay? Hybrid instruments. I want to talk about hybrid instruments. These are financial instruments with attributes or elements of both a financial liability and equity instruments. Okay, these are what we call a hybrid instrument. Okay, now These instruments require a definitive distinguishing factors to either classify them as financial liability or as equity instruments. Okay. Now, to do that, a question needs to be asked, and our ability to successfully answer that question will make us distinguish the two, all because there's a thin line. There is a thin line that separates the two. And what are the questions? To distinguish between a financial liability and an equity instrument, the answer to the underlying question will be of utmost importance. And what does that question is? The question is settlement required. Settlement required? If you're able to answer that question, we're able to distinguish them. And what are we distinguishing, if you remember? Things like preferential capital and things like deposit for shares and some alike. And what is the question here? If your answer says yes, settlement is required, it then means that such an instrument or such a hybrid instrument, the hybrid instrument will be considered a financial liability. Otherwise, if the answer is what? No. The hybrid instrument will be considered as an equity instrument. Now, let me give an example. Using preference shares. Preference shares capital can can be one, redeemable or irredeemable. Can be cumulative or non-cumulative. Can be participatory or non-participatory. Now, what are the differences between this? Redeemable preference shares is a preference share that by nature has a timeline where it will be redeemed, which means if you have a 5-year redeemable preference share, it means after 5 years, the company has to repay the preference shareholders. Irredeemable means it's much more perpetual. Perpetual in the sense that such is not redeemable at any instance except at the instance of the company as it chose, which is similar to that of ordinary shares. Which means such preference share, you are only entitled to receiving preference dividend over the existence of the company, or up to the point the company wishes to more or less call it back and repay the preference shareholders. Also, cumulative preference shares are preference share of which in any year when the company has no cash flow or profitability sufficient enough to pay dividend, the dividend so omitted in a year will be paid in future years when the company has the capacity to do so. Unlike non-cumulative, where any dividend lost in a year is deemed loss. Participatory preference shares are preference shares who also, in addition to whatever the fixed dividend is, they are equally entitled to participate in excess return or profit made based on specified criteria. Why not participatory are preference shares that are only entitled to preference dividend? Now, when we look at all of this, any preference share that is redeemable, whether it is still cumulative or non-cumulative, is participatory or not participatory, will be deemed to have answered this question of yes, that make it a financial liability. But the one that is irredeemable may be a financial liability or equity instrument, but subject to other qualities. Example, if it's redeemable such that it is non-cumulative, and probably it is participatory, it will be much more of equity instruments. But if it's irredeemable, but it is cumulative and majorly non-participatory, it can be much more a financial liability, which means we look at it in all substance to answer this question and conclude that it is financial liability or equity instrument. Another example is deposit for shares. And what are deposits for shares? Deposit for shares are situations where existing shareholders, potential shareholders, or an institutional investor may put down money as agreed with the company in anticipation that the company will issue shares in the immediate future, and a certain block of shares will be allocated to such a depositor in the event that the company issues shares. Okay, and this is to facilitate, one, that the company has access to funds, and also encourages company to fast track the process of issuing shares to these blocks. And that's why we have this. But the question then is, at what point are deposit for shares considered a financial liability, and at what point are they considered equity instruments? This is a function of what are the terms and conditions contained in the contractual document regarding the deposit for shares. If the amount so deposited is such that it is at the prerogative of the company to issue shares without any cost or burden attached to it, such as if a condition is attached that if shares are not issued within a certain period, the money will be refunded at an interest, or the money will start to accrue interest. In that two instances, such deposit for shares will have crossed that line, answering yes, that settlement is required. Otherwise, if such will not attract interest and repayment is at the discretion of the company on its inability to issue shares at that later date, such has not crossed the line, and the answer here is no. We'll treat it much more as equity instruments. We then speak to the fact that we need to know the overall substance of the contractual agreement regarding the deposit for shares. And if it is treated as a financial liability, usually it may be treated, depending on the condition attached to the contract, as a non-current liability. And if the condition spans for not more than a period of 1 year, it may qualify as a current liability. Otherwise, when there are no conditions visible towards answering the question of settlement, it then means that in that case, settlement may not be required and may not attract interest. And at that point in time, it will be treated as an equity instrument. Okay, and that is that. Now that will now lead us to compound instruments. Now, the difference between hybrid and compound is that compound instrument is equally a form of hybrid instruments. Only that it has both the components of equity and liability. Hence, it requires a split where applicable under certain conditions. And we're going to look at that, which means not all compound instruments so identified will require a split. Now let's say this is a compound instrument. This part. Okay. And the portion here, let's say, is liability. And this other portion let's say is equity. Now, having met certain conditions, what then do we do? We split this into two. And like a pizza, we take one out. The one we take out is the equity, while the larger pie is the liability. Now, how do we take them out? We are going to look at a methodology to doing that. Okay, but what condition will you need to fulfill? Now, where at the inception of the contract, the number of ordinary shares to which the convertible securities are to be exchanged for at maturity or settlement is known. That is predetermined. Then the compound instrument requires a split into liability components and equity components. Otherwise, where the number of ordinary shares to which the convertible securities as to exchange for at maturity or settlement of the contract is unknown. Unknown means that is variable, as may be so determined by the prevailing share price of the entity. Then such compound instruments will not require a split, thereby solely reported as a financial liability. Okay. Which means, in summary, if the number of shares to which it could be exchanged for is predetermined, is known, is fixed, therefore, it's more likely than not that a conversion will take place, assuming that the company is a blue chip. Otherwise, if it will be influenced by the price of the shares as at the point of conversion, is less unlikely because of the unfavorable terms that might be incidental trades. And in that case, it's less likely that conversion will take place. And therefore, cash settlement will be the requirement. And therefore, we'll consider that as a financial liability. We are going to see that from a practical illustration. Okay, now what are the examples of a compound instrument? Examples of a compound instrument are convertible securities, such as convertible bond, convertible debentures, convertible loans, and such as convertible preferred shares, if any. Okay, that is that. Now, as I said earlier, they are convertible on the premise that, they are slitted on the premise that they are convertible into fixed number of shares, that's ordinary shares, and they are not convertible or they are not splitted if they are not convertible into a known number of shares, which means variable number of shares. And that is the position there. Any other question? Now we are going to look at a practical demonstration of how conversion will influence our splits. Now let me put up a question. Okay. Now, can somebody read this question out?
Okay, question 4. FARA PLC issued a convertible bond of 1 million naira on 1st January 2017 with a maturity date of 31st December 2019. The coupon for the convertible bond is 12%. A comparable company to FARA PLC, that is Lily PLC, equally issued a bond of similar maturity within the same period at a coupon of 15% per annum. The only distinguishing factor between the bond issued by FARA and that issued by Lily is the non-convertible features embedded in the bond issued by Lily. Required, determine the appropriate accounting treatment concerning the recognition of this bond in the books of FARA PLC upon initial recognition on 1st January 2017, assuming A, the bond is converted into ordinary shares of FARA PLC based on the closing market price of company's share as at maturity of the bond. B, the bond is converted based on 5 ordinary shares for the 100 naira bond notes held by each bondholder at maturity.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, let me switch it over to my spreadsheet. Now, let me extract the relevant information out. The relevant information here include the face value. The face value is $1 million. Okay, in Naira in this case. Let me change every figure to Naira. Okay, coupon is 10%. Our redemption value is equally 1 million, which means it is redeemed at par, which is at face value. The duration in years is 3 years. And the coupon rate is 12%. And the conversion ratio is 10 shares per unit. And I'm doing that on the premise that 1, it says the bond is converted into ordinary shares of FARA PLC based on the closing price of the company's shares at maturity, which means if I go by A, this information is not there. Therefore, let me put it aside. It says we are converting. Conversion is based on closing price at maturity or settlement date. And in that case, it is variable or unknown number of shares. Why is it variable? Because you don't know what the price will be on that date. And therefore, if the price is higher, the number of shares will be lower, given that the value is fixed. And if the price is lower, the number of shares will be higher. Therefore, it's a variable number of shares. And in that case, as we have said earlier, if we go back to this, let me share it again. If we go back here, we have said something that if the number of shares is such that it is not known, as you can see here, therefore it is variable. In that case, what do? We are going to treat it as a financial liability, which means in this case, in this situation, the convertible bond of 1 million naira will be treated only as a financial liability. With the accounting entry below. Okay. The accounting entry below. And what is the accounting entry? We debit the mode of receipt, which is bank. When we are issuing bond, and we credit our liability, 12% convertible bond, which is a financial liability. With how much? With the sum of 1 million naira, which is a face value. And that is that. Okay. Now, but what if it is B? In the case of B, conversion is based on a predetermined ratio known and fixed at maturity date, thereby creates a fixed or known number of shares. Okay. Therefore, in that case, in this specific case, it splits into the liability component and equity component is required. The question then is, how do we do that? That is a question begging for answer. Therefore, we'll follow a methodology. Okay, now I can come here and bring that conversion ratio to bear. Okay, this speaks to the A. And this speaks to the B, where we have the conversion ratio. Therefore, again, I pick all of these variables. And the first step, which is step 1, I think I can bring this down here. First step here, which is step 1, is to determine the contractual cash flows over the time horizon. Okay, and what is time horizon? Is that this bond is for a period of 3 years, which means I can create the horizon. Let me draw it out, which means you have something like this. Year 0, year 1, year 2, and year 3. This is the point where
You can't see the spreadsheet, sir. You can't see the spreadsheet.
okay, you can't see the spreadsheets?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. What were you seeing before?
I'm seeing the question 4 on the
Okay.
PDF.
Okay. Now, this is.
Okay.
But before now, you were seeing the spreadsheets before now.
Yes, sir. Exactly. Yes.
Okay. That means when I did A, you saw the spreadsheets.
Yes, we saw it. I saw it.
Okay, thank you. Therefore, when we borrow, at the point of borrowing, we receive 1 million positive. Each year, by this bond, we have to pay interest. In year 1, we have to pay interest. In year 2 and in year 3, we have to pay interest, and we pay the principal. Now the question then is, what are the contractual cash flows? What are the contractual what? Cash flows. Now in year 1, interest will be 10% times, sorry, okay, yeah, 10% multiplied by the face value. That means 100,000 naira. That same amount is what I will have in year 2 and what I will have in year 3. But in year 3, in addition to that interest, I have to repay the whole sum, which is 1 million principal. Okay, I think in this question, the coupon rate is 12%. Therefore, let me change it, 12%. 12%. Why that of the straight bond is 15%? I'll come and explain that of 15% later. Okay. Now, this is the cash flows as predetermined over the duration of the loan. Now, step 2 is to determine the discount rates. Step 2, determine discount rates. Then put it in capital. The discount rates. Now, the discount rates should be the coupon rates or interest rates of a similar bond also similar in maturity and economic regime. Economic regime means similar in time periods when issued, but only vary with respect to the fact that it is a straight bond. And what's a straight bond? That is a non-convertible bond. I will explain. In this case, the discount rate is 15% of the comparable straight bond of Lee. Okay, I'll come to that. Now, what am I talking about here? What I'm talking about here is that if you look at this, Lilly is a comparable company to Fire, and is comparable in size with respect to financial leverage, business leverage, And it's also similar because they issue the bond in similar period of similar maturity. But the only difference is that Lily's bond is not convertible, which means it's a straight bond, okay? Whereas Fire bond is convertible. Now, when all conditions are the same, which means issuing similar period, similar tenor, similar economic regime, and the only thing that is not similar or not comparable is that one is convertible, one is not convertible. You always find out that the coupon rate or interest rate as demanded by the markets for a straight bond is always higher than a convertible bond. Who can tell me why, if you've had experience of it, before I explain? If you're familiar with it, why will, if every other thing are comparable, except for one is convertible, the other entity's bond is not convertible, why is it that the coupon rate or the interest rate of the entities with no conversion features are always higher when compared with those with conversion features? Who can explain? I can't hear anybody. Okay.
I was even about asking that question as well. I was even about asking that question because from the definition of these countries, it almost looks like effective interest rates to me. So I was not really sure. I wanted to even ask a question in that regard. So probably you can just help us, sir.
I need help from you. You want me to help you?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, before I help you, I wanted to Google something out for you. Okay, I think I've seen something here. Let me share it with you, and I will explain. Can you read this?
Okay. Investors will generally accept a lower coupon rate on a convertible bond compared with the coupon rate on an otherwise identical regular bond because of its conversion feature. This enables the issuer to save on interest expenses, which can be substantial in the case of a large bond. Okay.
I'm still not explaining it. I'm still going to explain it. Okay. There are a lot of things that you can still read. If I open it all in all, you might read about it extensively. Let me copy the link, but I will explain to you in a layman's language. Okay, let's come back to our discussion here. Okay. Now, the reason is not far-fetched that if Zenith and GTB are comparable companies in all respects, in terms of financial leverage, business leverage, risk, size, everything. And two of them are issuing bonds at the same time for the same duration, the same amount, everything the same. But the only different thing is that GTB has a convertible option on its bond, which means convertible option means that at maturity, instead of you collecting your money, you might exchange it for GTB shares. Whereas Zenith Bank is issuing a straight bond. At the maturity, collect your money and walk away. And two of them are giving you the same coupon rate of 10%. Which one are you going to buy if you remove sentiments, as if you don't even know what GTB is or Zenith, so that you don't say, because GTB is my bank or Zenith is my bank. These are just plain vanilla bank in which you have no attachments. Which one are you going to invest in based on the two conditions there? Who can answer that? Somebody must say something here.
I didn't get the point, sir. I didn't get the question, sir. Sorry.
GTB and Zenith are financial institutions. They are the same in size, in leverages, whether financial or business. And two of them want to raise funds through bond, 10 million naira each. But GTB bond is convertible to shares, which you have option of doing or not doing upon maturity of the bond, and it's going to give you coupon, which is interest at 10% per annum. Whereas Zenith will issue the same bond for 10 million for the same period, but its own is not convertible. At maturity, you just get back your money. And both of them are going to give you interest or coupon at 10%. Which one are you going to go for?
Okay, I think the one of convertible will be preferable.
Why?
Because if I'm unable to, what's it called? If I'm unable to, get my, if I'm unable to, how do I describe it now? But at the end of the day, I still have rights. Unlike the case of non-convertible, that where I do not have rights to convert my my bond to equity share. So the first one is actually preferable because I still have the right to to convert to shares, despite the fact that the rates are even the same.
Okay, who else? Who else? I can't hear any other person. Okay, now you've answered it all. I will go for GTB because peradventure GTB shares move up so that it gives me more value than collecting cash. Since it's predetermined, I'll just take it and move and gain more value than Zenith that will just return my money. Which then speaks to the fact that for me to make it indifferent, where you'll be confused on which one you need to go for, is if Zenith now says, I'm giving you 12%, and GTB is still giving you 10%, and Zenith is not convertible, GTB is convertible, which one will you go for? At that point in time, you might be confused. Why? You will now need to do more analysis to see which one is more valuable. Do you agree?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Based on the returns.
And that is that. Now, that is the premise to which we are choosing the higher discount rate, which is usually attributable to the straight bond. Now, I'm going to use that discount rate of 15% in this case. Now, what then will I need to do is to bring in my cash flows that I have here. There is interest only. Year 2 also is interest only. And year 3 is interest plus the principal or the redemption value. Okay. Okay. Therefore, let me concatenate it. Okay. Okay. Now, I bring up these values. And I find the discount rate, which is step 3. That I'm finding the present value of this. Now, what's the discount factor? If you could recall, what's our discount factor?
Okay, that's 1 divided by 1 plus r raised to power of n.
Okay. Our discount factor at period n is 1 over 1 plus r raised to power n, or 1 plus r raised to power minus n. Now, anyone you use, one plus r. What is my r? 15%.
15%.
Raised to power minus 1. That is, I'm discounting the one of year 1. year 2, and year 3. Therefore, which means this one once, this one 2 times, and this one 3 times. Therefore, I'll change this to 2, and I'll change this to 3. Or if I just put the number here 1, 2, 3, I can just link it so that it's not out coding, and I'll just draw it down.
I don't know if it is the network. Nothing is changing at all. It's just
Okay,
starting.
have you seen it? Can you see it? Can you see what I'm doing?
Okay, yes, I can see it now.
I believe you can see what I'm doing.
Yes, I can. From my end, I can see it.
Okay. Which means I discount year 1, year 2, year 3 backward. And to do that is what I've done here, the formula. Let me do it again. 1 plus R. Our R is the 15%. We have agreed as our discount rate. Raised to power minus 1. I'll do that same to year 2. I'll change it to raised to power minus 2. I'll do that to year 3. Raised to power minus 3. Okay, but I say instead of doing that, I can make it dynamic. I put 1, 2, 3 here, and I can just link it directly. Instead of outcoding at minus 1, I'll just say minus this cell, and I can drag it down. And I have my position here. Okay. Now what next? I'll find the products. That means I'll multiply the discount factor and the cash flows. And I get this in Naira terms. And I'll do that all in all. Okay. Now, when I sum it all, I have this. And the liability component is this, which means my step 4 is to sum up the present values to obtain the liability component, which is what I've done here. An alternative to this is that since it's a series of cash flow, I might do it in a more scientific way by saying what? By saying this, if you are familiar, that my first 3 years are interest. Interest is common in the first 3 years. Therefore, I bring out the interest, which was 120 in Naira. And I bring out principal, which is the redemption value, which is 1 million. Now, because this is a series of cash flows, 120 in 3 years, therefore, at that point, what you need is cumulative discount factor. And what is my cumulative discount factor for period 1 to n is 1 minus 1 plus R raised to power minus N all over R. And in that case, what will I do? I'll do that. Cumulative discount factor is 1 minus, open bracket, 1 plus R. What is my R again? 15% raised to power minus 3, which is my 3 here, all in all divided by R, which is 15%. And cumulatively, I have 2.2832. What we are simply doing is summing up these 3 together to get the same 2.2832. And that's what we are doing. Okay, but somebody say, instead of wasting time to know this formula, why can't I sum up this? What if it is 20 years? Will you do it one by one and sum up? What if it is 100 years? Will you do it one by one and sum up? And that's just it. And the third year, as we all know, is 1 plus R. And what's our R? 15% raised to power minus the third year, which is 3. And that is that. From there, we can do the same thing as we have it here and sum it up. What's now the summation? You get the same results. And that's that, which means you must understand the principle you've learned severally on annuity. When you have series of cash flows, okay, and they are even cash flow, you can aggregate them together and use the principle of cumulative discount factor. But if it's a single cash flow, what you do is to more or less determine the discount factor for each of those years. Now, step 5 is to obtain the equity components as the difference between the face value of the liability, the face value of the bond, and the liability components. Now, the face value of the convertible bond. And that's the 5th one, which means, what is the face value? The face value is 1 million. Now, what is the difference? The difference is 1 million minus the 931 will give us this amount. Okay, the same thing I do here, you get the same thing. Okay. And that's just it. Therefore, the 1 million, I link it, and it gives me the same value. And that is it. Therefore, what entry will I give? The accounting entry.
Debit cash.
I'll come here. Debit mode of receipts, which in this case, 1 million I received. And I'll credit 2 things. I'll credit the bond with the liability component, and I'll credit equity. the equity component. As a reserve. Therefore, this is equity instrument. This is liability component. Therefore, the liability components with this, and the equity components with this. And this should sum up to 1 million, and that is it. Does it make sense now?
Yes, it does. I have a question.
What's your question?
All right, then the question is, since we said they will convert it to ordinary shares, like they will convert it to equity, which is a convertible bond. I want to ask, why is it not affecting the ordinary shares itself? Why is it that it is affecting other component of equity or equity component itself? And the second question is, what is the appropriate name we can call that equity component? Is it just equity component? Because I know we have different forms of reserve. Is it that?
Okay.
I can hear you, sir.
Yeah. I've managed to hear all what you said because your network is cracking, but I'll answer it one by one. Okay, now it will not go to ordinary share capital because you have not issued, neither have they converted. You are only reserving in anticipation that they might convert at a later date. Does that make sense?
Okay,
now,
so that's
actually convert. You know, this thing was created at origination when we issued the bond.
Yes, sir. Oh,
at the
yes,
point of
yes, sir.
At the point of conversion, you are going to close out both the loan amount in the liability and the one in the equity component, other equity components, you close them to share capital and share premium based on the conventional rule of share capital and share premium. Does that make sense?
Very well, sir. Very well, sir.
Okay. Now, the second one.
Okay. And
the second one speaks to what we had as a discussion under conceptual framework, which is what I wanted to show you when I explained the concept of capital and capital maintenance. Okay, I'm switching to that now. Let me show you. And if you follow the trajectory, then, which is here. Okay, I started what is equity. And I explained from the fundamental equation. And I want to say equity can basically be grouped into two components, namely the share capital and the reserves. And I told you that the reserve can further be broken down as follows. Capital reserve, which is statutory in nature, retained earnings, which is conventional with respect to accumulated profits. Now, we now said other component of equity. We can have things like valuation reserve, fair value reserve, actuarial reserve, cumulative transaction reserve, cash flow hedge reserve, and etc. Now, another reserve that can come here is the reserve attributed to convertible bonds. And again, the name you call it must be defined, must be explained. Okay? And one of those such names is that you call it equity components of your convertible bond reserve. Do you understand? But No matter the name you call it, you must explain what it is in similar vein to what I've explained here. Even when you call something evaluation reserve, you must still explain it, that what is it? This is a reserve created from the fact that you have revalued your asset upward. What is actual reserve? You explain it. What is cumulative translation reserve? You explain it. What is calculated reserve? Everything must be explained to the stakeholders because you have a varying degree of stakeholders. And remember, one of the key attributes is understandability of the financial information, which means you must present it in a simple and plain manner that anybody that can read and write and have fair understanding will be able to understand and interpret. Does that make sense? Okay.
All right. Thank you, sir.
I think that I've addressed your question. Okay, I think Mr. Anthony wants to ask a question. Okay, if none, we've addressed that now. Now let's go back to our.
So I have a question on the chat.
Is there any other method of deriving equity portion? No, this is the only systematic approach allowed by IAS 32 in splitting such. And it's very straightforward and has its basis from economic fundamentals. Okay, thank you for that question. Okay, now all of the rhetoric stated here with similar examples are what we've done. Okay, in similar vein. Now, let's talk about Treasury.
Sorry.
Okay, what's your question again?
Yes, I think I mentioned it earlier. Now, the question is, in that particular question we just solved, we had two coupon rates. One is 12%, the second is 15%. And I think from my little understanding, I think one relates to what's it called, effective interest rate. So I just want to correlate that understanding that, okay, is it that whenever we have a coupon rate that is less than the, what's it called, the other, do we call that effective interest rate? I mean, the lesser coupon rate, do we call it the effective interest rate, or it is the higher that we call the effective interest rate? According to
Okay, that's not correct in any way. Whether lower or higher, that's not effective. All what you see here are contractual rates. What are contractual? Based on the agreement between the lender and the borrower. We have not crossed the barrier where we even be making reference to effective. Nothing is effective here. They are purely contractual rates. Only that one is contractual for a straight bond, the other one is contractual for a convertible bond. They are not effective interest rates. And even when we get talking about effective interest rates, we will not be using the word higher or lower as a connotation of distinguishing or characterizing it. Rather, we will understand the principle of what do we mean by effective interest rates. And luckily, we'll be determining effective interest rate with the aid of various Excel methodologies or mathematical expressions, which we're going to see in the next part of our discussion. Is that okay? Nothing speaks to effective interest rate at the point of this 12% or at the point of this 15%. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Therefore, treasury shares. What are treasury shares? Treasury shares are simply shares of a company to which the company repurchased or bought back, which means any shares of a company to which the company buys back is what called treasury shares. And there are various rationale for doing such. Now, let me show you rationales for shares buyback. Now, one of the real reasons of companies buying back their shares is if such shares, one, provides excess capital that the company no longer require because it comes at a cost. If a company is overcapitalized, one of the approaches you use, which is an effective way of financial management, is to buy the shares so that you can always have shares capital or funding that you can optimize value and you can be able to provide effective dividend. Two, some people also buy back in order to fulfill some other contracts they have, such as buying back to fulfill share options or share grants you have as a scheme, either in a share-based payment scheme or in any other similar scheme. Some people buy back in order to create competitiveness in their share price, or if that share price is so more or less low in the market, they might decide to buy it back, okay, with the option of reviewing it at a later date. But again, there are statutory restrictions when it comes to buying back shares, which varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But in the general sense, we'll just be looking at what is rational for buying back shares. Okay. Now, can you read this out? Can somebody read this out?
Okay. A company repurchases its shares when it wants to consolidate ownership, preserve stock prices, return stock prices to real value, boost financial ratios, or reduce the cost of capital. Investors can benefit from stock buybacks because the practice has generally taken the place of dividends.
There are a lot of reasons, but again, that's not why we are here. But we are here to more or less treat the consequence of buying back shares. Okay? Again, treasury shares are shares of a company that are repurchased from the shareholders. The question then is, how do we treat such? We treat it, whether it is actually cancelled or not, we treat it as a cancellation, which means we treat it as no longer in issue or no longer outstanding. Okay, and what does that mean? It means for accounting purposes, either will you use it as a basis of determining earnings per share, or will you use it in determining, in paying dividend and determining some other metrics that we'll be looking at subsequently. And that is that in that manner. Okay. Now, treasury shares, what do? Invariably, you use it to reduce your share capital based on the nominal value. And you also use the excess to reduce share premium, which is a premium in excess of the book value. Okay, and that is that, which means when you see a financial statement where share capital is reduced by treasury shares, it means in that year, such company has bought back the shares. Sometimes the treatment varies. It might not be used directly to reduce share capital and premium. If it's done in that way, they will not create a separate column which will show treasury shares rather than positive to be negative, which means in that situation, they are not necessarily buying it back to cancel out outrightly. They are buying it back with the whole purpose of reissuing it in order to meet some share-based payment plans that they may have. But when they cancel it outrightly, it means they are going to use it to reduce on a permanent basis the amount of share capital and share premium, respectively. Okay, another discussion we have is how do we treat interest, dividend, and realized gains and losses on financial instruments. Now, let's start with interest. Interest arose from financial assets that are having contractual cash flows or financial liability that have contractual cash flows, which means they are debt securities. Interest expense is taken as a charge to your profit or loss, whether it is paid for or not. Interest income is taken as a credit to your profit or loss, whether paid for or not. Dividend paid is treated as a distribution out of profit to the owners of equity, which means at no point is dividend paid treated as an expense, except for dividend paid to preference shareholder, where such preference shareholder are classified as financial liabilities, which means such dividend paid will be treated as a finance cost. But any dividend paid on preference shares that is classified as equity or dividend paid on ordinary shares are always going to be treated as a return to owners of equity, which means it's a reduction of the amount of profit or retained earnings. Whereas dividend income, whether received or not, but once it has been substantially issued, will be treated as an income, which is a credit to your profit or loss. Gains and losses that are realized. What are realized gains or losses on financial instruments? These gains or losses only materialize when the financial assets have been disposed of or the rights to it has expired. And likewise, a financial liability has been extinguished, either by way of settlement or otherwise. Once it is realized, which means it's not an accounting measure, but rather value is derived in cash terms, such will be recognized in profit or loss, either as an income or as an expense, regardless of the classification or nature of the financial instrument, which means it will be treated as a credit or charge to your profit or loss in that case. And this does not speak to unrealized or fair value gain or losses, because those ones are unrealized, and we're going to discuss it extensively. Also, offsetting. The general rule of offsetting is that barely do you offset assets with liability. In similar vein, barely do you offset financial assets with financial liability unless certain conditions are met. There are two conditions that are critical. The first one is there legally enforceable rights that create such an offset? And that must be based on contractual agreement that is enforceable. Otherwise, such offsetting will not be permitted for financial reporting purposes. But again, it's not limited to the fact that there's legally enforceable rights, but it also entails the fact that at any point in time, it is primary that the asset have to be realized, the financial asset have to be realized in order to settle the financial liability. Otherwise, such offset will not be allowed, which is until those two conditions are met, such offset will not be allowed. The next issue there borders on owners' transactions, as I've discussed earlier. One of the transactions with owners of equity include dividend payments, include raising of share capital, include treasury shares, that is depleting your share capital by way of buying back, include recapitalization of bonus issues, which means your profits, you are recapitalizing it as a permanent capital by way of issuing bonus and shares. Okay. And another thing there is this: how do we treat transaction costs relating to shares. Any transaction cost, including stamp duty and related taxes, attributable to you issuing capital or depleting capital by way of repurchasing capital or shares are not going to be treated as an expense, but rather they will be treated as a reduction of equity, usually through retained earnings or share premium as they may be applicable. Okay, for example, if you issue shares and they are floating cost or transaction cost to issuing shares, you don't charge it to your profit or loss, you charge it to your share premium. And when there's no share premium, you charge it to retained earnings. When you're also buying back shares, any cost you incur in doing such, you also charge it to premium, if any, or retained earnings. Okay. And that brings us to the end of all of our discussion and narratives on IAS 32. Now, in order to discuss IFRS 9, which will be in our part 2, we will more or less look at where we're coming from, and that will quickly take us to where we are today. And where are we today? We are at the point of IFRS 9, which means this is where we are today. I will limit our discussion going forward to 2 of the 3 items. What are the 2? The financial assets and the financial liability. Why? Because unlike those 2, equity instruments are not remeasured. They are not remeasured because by nature, they are measured once, which is at origination, and subsequently, they become residual interest, which is influenced or determined by what is left after all liabilities are deducted from assets. Whereas for financial liability and financial assets, they are subject to various remeasurements, which might span through measurement that is based on amortized costs and measurements that are based on fair value. And we're going to look at all of those things. And at the point of amortized cost, one of the key methodologies of obtaining that is what we call the effective interest method. And that method, the beauty of it is to help us establish a single rate, which is known as effective interest rate, in order to be able to approximately discount and obtain or equalize the present value of the future inflow or outflow to the present value of the current outflow or inflow. And we're going to discuss that extensively, which in the capital market, the real alternative of calling that is what we call the yield to maturity. Why in the project management committee or project finance instance, you might call it internal rate of returns. All of those rates are more or less trying to equate the present value of inflow to the present value of outflow. And we're going to look at that extensively, okay? And we'll look at other things. But for now, we have more or less laid the foundation for financial instrument. And all what we have discussed extensively border on the requirements of IAS 32. Any other question? Any other question? Any other question?
Okay, I have a question, sir. Still on that spreadsheet.
Okay.
Yes, I'm trying to, I don't, okay, please, can you go there, sir? Sorry. The spreadsheet, Excel.
Okay. I'm there.
Yeah, I'm here to, okay. Okay, maybe when it's, okay, yes, it's here already. Okay, I'm looking at the second requirement that we answered just now, where they said the bond is converted based on 5 ordinary shares for 100 naira bond notes held by. So I was just trying to, I was thinking maybe we're going to do all of this conversion, all of from 5%. I don't know, but I observed that it did not.
I think you are not getting the point.
Okay.
Today is the day they issue the bond, and they are telling you that at maturity,
Okay,
at
at the conversion date, that will take effect. Okay, okay.
we are only using that as a
Oh,
basis that if you know the ratio today, it's more likely that you convert,
oh,
even that is a blue chip company, or because the share price will have risen beyond that level. But if the
yes.
ratio will be determined by what the price is tomorrow, therefore, if the price is higher, I'll be getting lower number of shares because the value will be the same. Therefore, I might not have an incentive to convert, and that's why we are treating it strictly as a financial liability. But where there's an incentive, and there's an incentive on the premise that one is a blue chip company, expecting that the long run price of that company will be higher than the current price, and that will give us an avenue to extract value from conversion. And that will make you much more rational in decision making to convert rather than not to convert. And when you convert, it means there's an equity element inherent in it, which we are splitting ahead of time. We need to understand the economics and the commercial substance around all of those contracts before we even lay our hands on the accounting. Which is we are not just accounting for accounting's sake, we are accounting to reflect the economic fundamentals of the contractual agreement. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes, yes. Okay. Thank you, sir.
And that's why I give you more avenue to research on instruments, on contracts, on other things, so that you can be able to see the sense how the accounting is built up. Do you get what I'm saying now? It's not that we're just building accounting and we want to build it. No, the accounting should reflect the impact and the economic substance of the transactions. And that's what we're trying to do. Okay, any other question or contribution? I can't hear anything from Esther, from Shade, from Anthony, and the like. Okay, in the absence of none, to the contrary, thank you very much. And let's watch out for tomorrow when we'll be discussing on the part 2. At that point in time, we'll be introducing IFRS 9 in context. Thank you very much, and God bless you guys. Bye.
Thank you, sir.